I suppose this is the crux of this. What are we coming to this podcast for? Are we listening to Confessions of a Female Founder for business advice, or are we listening to it for nuggets of life from Montecito?
They've called it a vapid lessons in self-love, sycophantic interview podcast is stomach churning.
If America isn't buying into this brand, then they've got a problem.
This is a last chance saloon for Harry, but it looks like his lawyer is trying everything possible, any possible angle that is going to convince the appeal judges to side with Prince Harry.
And he is his father, but he's the king. And this was a case being taken in His Majesty's court against His Majesty's government. There is absolutely no way that the king could be seen to be intervening in this at all.
Well, they've not spoken for months and months and months. And this is a ludicrous situation.
Perhaps it was a bit of a veiled threat from Harry.
I just think it's an insult to everybody to imagine that he cannot bring his family back to the UK. Hello, this is The Sun's Royal Exclusive. I'm Royal Editor Matt Wilkinson, and today we welcome to the studio Royal Correspondent Sarah Hewson and GB News Royal Correspondent Cameron Walker. This week, publicity-shy Meghan Markle uses her podcast to reveal more about life in Montecito. Could privacy-loving Harry be writing a second book, while the Princess of Wales tells Stress to take a hike, and the King and Queen have a new piece of music celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary? All right, guys, confession time. Who got to the end of the second episode of Meghan's new podcast?
I did, for professional reasons, Matt. I don't know about you, Cameron. I actually thought this one was better than the first episode, and the reason I thought it was better was actually there was a bit less Meghan and there was a bit more of her guest, Reshma Saujani, being allowed to speak, because actually she's got a very interesting story to tell.
Yeah, she certainly does. And I think hearing about how she got into Yale Law School, I think was quite interesting, if it wasn't for the fact, of course, that it's Meghan doing the podcast, because that's what's taking the headlines, isn't it? But I think it was interesting that Meghan harks back towards the start of the episode to how she met Reshma at Kensington Palace when she was still a working member of the royal family. She was trying to get her business off the ground in the United Kingdom, grow it in the United Kingdom. And it just harks back to the, not nostalgia, but it's kind of a different time period and where, of course, Meghan is up to now. I also thought what was quite interesting is talking about her two children and the fact that at the time of the recording, both of them were ill, one with some respiratory virus, RSV, and another with flu. And I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, if I had a cold, I just had a cold. I didn't have the specific name of it, so I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, there was a lot that she offered up about her home life in this podcast. I know you're talking about a lot of it was with her guest. Her guest story was quite captivating, and we had about over 40 minutes of listening to, you know, how she became a founder and everything she went through for Yale. But a lot of the little trinkets that were offered to us were about Meghan's home life. And I think we had here, she said she loves being a mum so much, it's a favourite thing, and she tells a little story about how Harry tells her that she needs to kind of relax and have a bath.
Yeah, she needs to go off, take some time for herself, maybe go and do a workout, maybe go and have a bath. She can't stop scrolling through her phone for photos of the children. It is her favourite job in the world. And I suppose this is the crux of this. What are we coming to this podcast for? Are we listening to Confessions of a Female Founder for business advice, or are we listening to it for nuggets of life from Montecito? And I think that's probably the challenge with it, because it's not really a business podcast, is it? It's more of a lifestyle chat, because it's very cosy. Yeah. Clearly these two women know each other. There's a lot of, oh, you're amazing, kind of, there's some fangirling going on in every episode.
This is 100% what I was going to ask. I mean, Cameron, do you have an answer to that? I mean, it's or you have a point of view on that. Is this a business podcast? Is it masquerading as a business podcast, but really it's just a show for Meghan to, you know, talk more about her life?
Well, I think it's Meghan trying to find a niche, and I don't think she's quite got there yet. And what we do know, of course, is Meghan wants to be an entrepreneur. In fact, she says she's not an influencer. She wants to be a businesswoman. And what I find from watching or listening to the episodes is it's almost like her trying to get advice sometimes from these very successful multi-billion-dollar business women. And it's almost like Meghan you can tell she's genuinely has a passion for it and is very excited to speak to these amazingly influential and successful women, and perhaps hoping it's going to rub off on her a little bit.
Well, there's one
as ever.
line in it where she talks about, if you're out there setting up a business and you want to get some support for it, don't go asking for money, go asking for advice, and then you're more likely to get the money. But I do think, these are two women, they're talking about business. Interestingly, with Reshma Saujani, I think her journey is one that Meghan would have loved to have had, because, she actually ran for Congress. She was supported by the singer John Legend. She wasn't successful, but we know that Meghan had political aspirations. And Reshma Saujani's business, Girls Who Code, her non-profit, has been hugely successful. So I think there's definitely some kind of aspiration there from Meghan to learn from her, but how much we actually learn from these podcasts is
one thing I think that I think I learned from it is that I think this is one of the most important podcasts, one of the most important times I've heard her talking. Because I'd get your thoughts on this. She really lays out that she is a businesswoman and a working mother. It seems that this now seems to be the direction that she's going, and that's what this whole podcast was about. Is about juggling it all, doing it from my home, and as you rightly pointed out, that she has the two children are ill upstairs, and she's still having to work downstairs in their vast mansion. That must be really tough. But she seems to be laying out her brand, I think, more.
Well, yes, and I think that's the point. Reshma had to work incredibly hard to get to where she was. She didn't have an $11 million mansion in Montecito. She hadn't married a prince of the realm. And I think something that perhaps some people are going to criticise Meghan for is the fact that, yes, she is clearly a working mother, and yes, she is starting to launch a business, but she has a lot of support behind her. She has millions of pounds, plus the house, plus Prince Harry's support. So naturally, it is going to be easier for her in a startup business scenario than it has been for Reshma and some of the other people that she is speaking to on this podcast.
Now, I will ask your opinion on whether you enjoyed the podcast, but have you seen the reviews? So we've been through the reviews in the past where we were for Meghan's Netflix show, which have not been particularly kind to her, but she's also getting some very poor reviews. It's not going down very well. I think it's not exactly top of the charts on either Spotify or Apple at the moment.
It was number 10 on Spotify, but that was way lower than Archetypes, which went in at the top. Some of the reviews last week for the first episode were 1-star reviews.
I've got some of them here. They've called it a vapid lessons in self-love. Sycophantic interview podcast is stomach churning. That's from The Guardian. That's quite left-leaning.
Yeah.
It is, and then the Telegraph's call it an inane stream of mindless aphorisms with no confessions or secrets.
There are a lot of business buzzwords and these kind of inspirational quotes thrown out there during it. And I think that's why, maybe that's as sort of hardened Brits listening to it. Maybe there's a cultural difference here as well. But that's where it's lacking, is that real punch and that real kind of getting actually to the nuts and bolts of it. I think this guest, Reshma, does try to do that, and her story is really interesting. But I think your point, Cameron, that Meghan doesn't have that backstory in the sense of really scrapping to try and build this business from scratch, because she's building this business from a huge platform. And that's why she's got the podcast. That's why she's got the Netflix series, because she is the Duchess of Sussex.
And that's why also her As Ever products have sold out of their first batch. And it's interesting, the reviews have been pretty scathing of the podcast, but also of her Netflix series as well. Very similar situation in terms of, what is the USP here? Does it actually have a point to this? Or is it just because she is Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, people are watching it? And it's similar, although it was number 10 on Spotify, this podcast. It was also in her Netflix series was also in the top 10, her recent lifestyle series as well. So although the reviews are bad, people are still watching it. So the question is going to be, are people watching it because they love to hate it, or do they genuinely enjoy watching it or listening?
So despite the poor reviews, and despite not topping the charts like Archetypes did, it's not time for Meghan throwing the towel yet then? We're still more to come.
Well, it's still generating headlines. We're still talking about it. The newspapers are still writing about it. And I suppose, you know, the worst thing could be it being greeted with silence and just completely ignored.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, you know, it is doing something. And yes, sometimes it is described as vapid, but this is about women talking about setting up their businesses. And so I suppose that juggling home life and the founding of the business is going to come up. And it isn't only going to be about the numbers and the spreadsheets, for example. They want to talk about the challenges.
And the production company, of course, as well, Lemonado Media, a female-founded company. So they are going to have a, you know, kind of an emotional investment in this kind of podcast working out. And as you say, Matt, you know, people are still watching it, aren't they, or listening to the podcast. So it is good publicity for them in that sense. Whether it gets commissioned for season 2, we'll have to wait and see.
What I would like to see is it being less about friends and the less of the chumminess, which is a little bit alienating to listeners, and more about her getting guests in her own right and because they want to appear on that podcast.
It's very US focused. I think all her guests are mainly based in America so far, and so they were on the Netflix show. But I think the American media have mainly ignored it. I mean, we have viewers on the show, many from America. I'd like to hear their thoughts. They can post on YouTube channel whether it is getting much coverage over there. But I'm led to believe that it's not really being picked up by the American media, which surely would be her target if she was moving into that sphere.
Yeah, 100%.
Does that suggest then that the British audience, you know, are very much loving to hate Meghan and perhaps by extension Harry, and the US just don't care anymore?
Well, that may be the direction I'm pushing this.
Yeah.
And that's the whole direction of the Vanity Fair
Yeah.
piece, which was, you know, really damaging for them, wasn't it? Which was that, you know, you can forget Britain because we know that Britain was going to give them a tough time and would likely greet this with a fairly cynical reaction. But actually, if America isn't buying into this brand, then they've got a problem.
Yeah.
And Vanity Fair, of course, usually quite supportive of Harry and Meghan, but not for that article.
No. There was one brief mention of Harry, I think, in this one, as we talked earlier, where Harry kind of helping out, looking after the children. At the end of last week, Harry emerged from the court case. We're still waiting for the result to hear whether taxpayers are going to pay for his security, his 24-hour armed guard. But he did speak to a newspaper here in the UK outside of court, and it got published at the weekend, where he said a very interesting comment where he believed that he was trapped, or that it was an attempt to trap him by removing his security, to trap him in the royal family. It's been pointed out this is a contradiction because during the court case, there was a statement read out where he said that he felt that he was being forced out of the royal family because they were taking away security and it was an attempt to kick him out. Are you worried about this contradiction, guys, that he can't seem to get his story straight?
Well, I think this is a last chance saloon for Harry because this is now at the appeal stage, isn't it? So it's he's either going to be successful or he's not going to be successful. I'm not a legal expert, but it looks like his lawyer is trying everything possible, any possible angle that is going to convince the appeal judges to side with Prince Harry on this particular point. I think what's also a tricky point for this is you look back at Spare and the Sandringham Summit and the arguments that Prince Harry had with Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, and the late Queen's private secretary, and others. And the fact that the King's private secretary is on the Royal and VIP Executive Committee, RAVEC, which made the decision to downgrade his security with the Home Office, I think grates with Prince Harry, and he has spoken about that in the past, that there's some kind of bias within that committee, which is why his security was downgraded.
And the fact that he thinks the one person who could make a difference to this is his father, the King, who with a nod could sweep this issue away. And of course he can't, because he can't be seen to be interfering in the judicial system. And that is why Harry didn't meet up with him, even though they were in the country for a number of hours at the same time as Harry arrived and before the King headed off to Italy. But it is at the crux of that dispute with the royal family.
It's fascinating you bring that up because also Harry said this matters more than his cases against the media. He said this is the one that matters more than anything. Do you think his father should get involved? I think you touched on it there. I mean, he is his father. And
he is his father, but he's the King. And this was a case being taken in His Majesty's court against His Majesty's government. There is absolutely no way that the King could be seen to be intervening in this at all. Even any innocuous comment that could have been interpreted in a way and find its way into evidence in the court by Prince Harry's barrister. And I think that is why the King's advisors are very keen that he should keep his distance at this stage. And it's a massive problem in which, if we're talking about any kind of rapprochement between them, because Harry sees it as a betrayal, that he hasn't been given this security, that others in public life, former Prime Ministers, Liz Truss, for example, get taxpayer-funded protection that he doesn't. He sees Clive Alderton's involvement on Ravec as a serious conflict of interest. And the King can't have conversations with him. And we're learning that the distance between them is perhaps greater than ever.
Well, they've not spoken for months and months and months.
Haven't seen each other since February of last year. And that was that one brief 30-minute meeting after the King's diagnosis. And we're learning through sources close to Harry, who've been speaking to People magazine, which is often their preferred outlet if they want to get a message out there, that Harry only found out about his father's recent visit to hospital through the media, and that he doesn't know what his father's prognosis is.
Yeah, I mean, so we did that in The Sun a couple of weeks ago, that he'd only found out by the media. I mean, this is a ludicrous situation, isn't it? And it can't only be because of this court case. It can't only that's surely not the only reason the King won't answer the phone calls, Cameron.
Well, I think it's quite a fundamental reason, because I think the King, according to People magazine, the sources speaking to them, close to Harry, the King sees it really as his duty as head of state that he should not get involved with the judicial system. And I think he may well have been advised that he probably shouldn't take his son's calls in case this court case is brought up, in case he's forced to say something to Prince Harry. And we know, because of Spare and all the rest of it, that what the private conversations Harry has with his family members can end up being leaked to the press or published in a book. And I think that is what's making the royal family and those close to them paranoid about talking to Prince Harry, particularly on such a, could be a fundamental constitutional issue such as this.
I think there have been previous missed opportunities as well, but on this occasion, for Harry flying in specifically for his appearance at the Court of Appeal, that would have been very difficult if it had turned out that the King had held a meeting with his son on that occasion, so close to it.
As soon as you've mentioned Spare, Cameron, can we raise this idea that possibly Harry could be plotting a second book or a podcast? And I bring this up because, again, I keep going back to what he was talking about last week at the end of this court case. He said that people would be shocked by what's being held back, because he had heard some private details that we didn't hear in court. But he was allowed to read some documents that haven't been made public. And he says his worst fears have been confirmed by the whole legal disclosure in the case, and it's really sad. He's free to talk about this stuff, possibly. He's free to bring out another book or speak about it on a podcast like Meghan's doing.
Yeah, well, the reason that some of those details were not read out in court was because it was a national part of national, security issues. That's why. But perhaps it was a bit of a veiled threat from Harry. I think there will be people asking the question that if he loses this case, is he going to throw his toys out the pram and publish or speak to a publication about some of that private stuff that we heard in court? And as you say, Matt, he says it would shock people. So that would be in one sense, is that going to be enough material for a book? He also said in the promotional interviews following the publication of Spare, his bombshell autobiography, that he had enough material for a second memoir. So is this going to come to fruition? I think Palace sources, the Palace are going to be slightly concerned about that one. I think they are probably hoping, just going back to whether he's going to write a book or not, that Harry and Meghan's Californian dream is going to work out. Because if it doesn't, the only thing they've got to fall back on is selling more royal secrets. And I think that is a genuine concern.
I think as well, he's not going to let this one go, regardless of what the outcome of this is when we get the decision from the Court of Appeal. So whether or not it's a legal crusade, there'll still be a moral crusade for Prince Harry. He said he wants to get under the bonnet and fix things, that although this has been exhausting and overwhelming, I don't think he's going to let it go. So he's going to have to find some kind of outlet for this, whether that's another book, whether it's a podcast, whether he tries to help others. I don't know, but I can't see him letting this one go.
I'm going to be a bit contrary here, but 5 years ago, Megxit happened, he's been over many, many times. He comes over for charity events. He comes over for the Invictus Games event at St Paul's. He comes in and out for the odd royal event, like funerals and coronations and stuff like that. Is he just going a bit over the top here? I mean, why is he obsessed with the security when for the last 5 years, as far as I'm aware, and I do trust the police, and I think there are police officers and there are people in the Home Office and royal household that are thinking, why doesn't he trust the fact that we can keep him safe under these current conditions? I mean, in the past 5 years, nothing bad's happened.
So the court has heard that when Prince Harry comes back to the UK, he has to give the Home Office 30 days notice for them to assess what kind of level of police protection he should be entitled to on that particular visit. In other words, a case-by-case basis. From Harry's point of view, the security is provided with on these occasions has not been adequate and has not been up to the standards that he would have had as a working member of the royal family. So, for example, there was an incident following a Well Child family charity event a couple of years ago where he did not have a police escort, and he alleges...
I hate interrupting people, but that is the only incident that he's come up with, and that was something that the journalists turned up at, where it was photographers, and he appears to want armed police officers to deter journalists and photographers. That's the only case that we've heard.
Well, it goes back to his paranoia, doesn't it? Right. About what I think it all goes back to what happens with his mother in the tunnel in Paris in 1997. And clearly that would have been incredibly traumatic for him. But I just think it's not within his character to let these kind of things go. And I think, as you were saying, Sarah, I think that perhaps could be the issue.
And the point was being made by his team when he visited Ukraine that actually he had far the greater security, because he was accused of hypocrisy. Well, how can you go to Ukraine and suggest that you're not safe to bring your family back to Britain or visit Britain? And his team saying, well, actually, he had far greater security in Ukraine, and likewise when Harry and Meghan go to Colombia or Nigeria, for example, than he does when he comes to Britain. It comes down to the intelligence sharing, doesn't it? That he can pay for his own security team, but he can't receive the kind of threat level intelligence that he would have had when he was a working royal. And I think, he does have this bespoke system, 30 days notice, and then he gets it. But he and Meghan can't freely come without asking permission, bring the children back. He says he wants them to know their heritage in the UK.
I think you know my position on this. I say 5 years he's been coming back and forth. I speak to police officers that basically say nothing, we are professional police officers with all the intelligence, and if anything's that we think's going to happen that he could be in danger, we'll put the things in process.
His argument is that why is he being treated differently to others? He thinks he's been singled out, that he's being punished. And as you set out at the beginning, Sarah, that he thinks that they are... You'll say that. I'm not going to necessarily say that. I mean, look, I think this bespoke system has worked until now, but there is an argument, as I pointed out earlier, that you could say, why should Liz Truss get it for her, brief term in office, when Harry, who was born a prince, is the son of the king and always will be, no matter where he lives, doesn't have that right. On the other hand, if you say to the taxpayer, you're going to be funding a guy who's decided to up sticks and live in Montecito and, while his wife is selling jam, well, who's going to pay for it? You're going to pay for it? That's not going to go down very well. And,
and we'll be paying for policing journalists sitting outside a charitable event, because that's the only case that he's made public.
Yeah, I mean, Harry did say he would have been happy to pay for the police protection, but he wasn't allowed because that would set a precedent for rich football billionaires to to pay for Metropolitan Police protection as well. So it's not as if he hasn't tried, but I think it just does come down to this fundamental point that Prince Harry feels he cannot bring his family back to the UK because he says they are unsafe. I think perhaps the popularity ratings of Prince Harry and Meghan may have something to do with that as well. They perhaps are slightly more unpopular than other members of the royal family, and does that mean they're more of a target?
I just think it's an insult to everybody to imagine that he cannot bring his family back to the UK, which is a very safe country, because the fear of some kind of disaster happening. I just think it's really rude to us all. But,
and also, I think with a criticism of Prince Harry perhaps is he's been offered rooms to stay in Buckingham Palace in royal protected areas, and yet he chooses to stay in hotels which doesn't have automatic police protection.
Yep. There we go. We're plenty for a second book then, or a Harry podcast to talk about all this. Right, there's many royals that I would like to take a hike. However, Princess of Wales has gone for a lovely walk in the Lake District. This is a video that was filmed a couple of weeks ago. It was earlier this year. It was a beautiful sunny day in the Lake District. She was on the shores or near the shores of Lake Windermere, which is a wonderful part of the world. And it was as part of her role as joint president of the Scouts. Cameron, you've been talking about this all week, I know, on television. So what did you make of this video?
It was very cinematic. It was a nod perhaps to the previous videos that the Princess of Wales has.
There is a theme, isn't there?
There is a theme, and it's all about sanctuary and nature. And if you remember the video she did when she announced that she is in remission from cancer, or completed her cancer journey, I should say, is that she has found sanctuary in nature. But now she's bringing it on to the next generation. She's been joint president of Scouts since 2020. And I think the whole point was her using her platform as the Princess of Wales to promote the cause of Scouts, which does get a lot of perhaps inner city kids out and about into nature, putting down their smartphones, giving them the life skills they need, etc. And then the Princess, of course, is in a very privileged position. She moved her own family out of London to Windsor, so her own children, George, Charlotte and Louis, could have access to more outside space. So it's just a classic royal, publicity thing to shine a light on a charity.
I think it's something that she's been talking about for a long time, originally to do with her early years, the power of nature for children, but it's taken on a different perspective since her cancer diagnosis.
Really, yeah.
She talks about nature and its healing powers, and that she feels a real spiritual connection. And we've seen this repeatedly, as you talked about the video filmed in Norfolk when she announced the end of her chemotherapy. At World Cancer Day, she posted a picture of herself in the trees that was taken by Prince Louis. This Mother's Day, after the furore over last year's Mother's Day picture, actually, she talked about Mother Nature and celebrating Mother Nature. So I think we're seeing a real theme. And even June last year, when she talked about not being out of the woods yet, and we had that first official photograph of her since her cancer diagnosis, where she's standing under a tree and looking up into the sky, very much a clear theme, something that she's done through her work, but something that's deeply personal to her now.
It's also a different form of communication, do you think, Sarah? That you totted up the amount of videos there that they've put out. These are Kensington Palace generated videos that are issued on social media, but also to the press to get mainly the Princess of Wales's story across. What do you think about this way they're communicating with the world at the moment?
Yeah, and as Cameron said, they are very beautifully shot, cinematic videos, and they are getting a message out there. They're being able to pump it out onto social media and perhaps appeal to a different audience. They're not relying on mainstream media, they're doing it themselves, and maybe applying to appealing more to a younger generation. These are very aesthetically pleasing videos
and I think,
out there.
And gone are the days where the palaces, Buckingham or Kensington, have to rely on the mainstream media to cover their engagements, because as you say, they've got their own social media platforms, they've got their own YouTube channels, and they can put the video out there. I think the question may start arising as to not whether we can trust what they're putting out, because clearly we can, but I think in terms of, is there any kind of independent journalism going on when it is purely shot by Kensington Palace and their videographers? So I think there's a balance to be struck.
Yeah, I'd have loved to have gone.
Yeah.
So I asked when they put the video out, I was like, could we have attended this lovely walk in the Lake District? But it's a nice video, and you're right to point out that it's the theme, it's the direction that we're seeing from her at the moment ever since she was diagnosed with cancer, and the way that she's been working out. So I'm full of praise for it. It
was not in the court circular though, was it?
No. I did ask that question.
You did? Yeah.
One thing that we will be allowed our cameras to, however, Cameron, and we'll both be attending, and I'm sure you've been in the past many times, this is the Maundy service.
Yeah.
The King and Queen will be at Durham Cathedral. And this is going to be my first one, so I've been reading the op note to try to work out. It's quite a quirky ceremony. The King and Queen will be at Durham. They go to different cathedrals every year, and they'll be handing out coins to, and I believe these coins, these Maundy coins this time I've got down here, represent or commemorate the Queen Mother, and in recognition of World War II. And these are handed out to people in recognition of their Christian service. And
a specific number of people as well. So 76 men and 76 women will be receiving the Maundy coins, and that is to represent the King's age at 76. And it is a tradition that dates back, it has its roots in Jesus washing the feet of his disciples. It used to take place in London, and then the late Queen decided it should go out, and why should only Londoners benefit from this? Last year it was at Worcester Cathedral, wasn't it? But actually the King wasn't there because he was undergoing his cancer treatment. So Queen Camilla, she was the first consort to hand out the Maundy money.
I find it interesting the religious aspect. We kind of forget the things that the royal family have to do. Obviously, the head of the church, etc. We'll have Easter coming up soon. We'll have an Easter Sunday service. As I say, we're going to be in Durham. Cameron, are you excited in seeing the King and Queen there doing this Maundy service?
I'm always excited to see the King and Queen, Matt. Yeah, I mean, I was in Worcester last year as well, covering it. And as you say, Sarah, it was just the Queen. And it was very sad that the King wasn't there because of his cancer treatment. So this year, I think, is going to be quite poignant that we are going to see both of them. And I think it is significant, of course, that the King is Supreme Governor of the Church of England. And there is clearly a very religious message to Maundy Thursday, the day before Good Friday, of course. And I think we are going to see an emphasis really from the King for the Christian calendar over this weekend. But of course, the King wants to see himself as the defender of all faiths. And we have seen, particularly from the royal family's social media accounts, celebrating lots of different religions who, practice here in the United Kingdom.
Great. It was also their 20th wedding anniversary. So we were in Italy and they marked it well. They spent it working, basically. They went to we had a feast in the evening, the state banquet and jobs throughout the day, but they always go to Burke Hall, as I'm sure you know, to kind of officially mark it in private. And we had a little ceremony, another little church ceremony on Sunday morning at Crathy Kirk, just outside Balmoral. There was a new piece of music. So this was their 20th wedding anniversary music piece. Have you heard it?
I haven't heard it, no. Have you?
No, I haven't heard it either.
Nor me, sorry about that. But it is a handwritten new piece of work, The Weather of My Being, and its composer is Professor Paul Mealer. I mean, that's quite a nice 20th wedding anniversary present.
And it's something that will hugely appeal to the King. You'll know that the coronation music, he was very hands-on in the selection of that music. The same for Harry and Meghan's wedding, for example. He takes a huge amount of pleasure in these new pieces being commissioned. Of course, they're part of history and part of, his discography in many ways. And so, a very nice touch for their 20th wedding anniversary.
And I believe I'm right in saying, following the service at Crathy Kirk, he was given a box, and inside the box was the handwritten kind of music score for that piece of music written for his 20th anniversary, so he could take it back to Burke Hall with him and enjoy with Queen Camilla. Of
course, we just had his Apple playlist, haven't we?
Yes.
He was revealing his best hits and stuff like that. I remember I was at the coronation, and we got there really early and we were walking. We needed to go to the bathroom, obviously, because it'd been there for such a long time. And as we were walking through, the ushers were telling the people inside who were waiting also for a long period of time to please stop talking and listen to the music, because the King had laid out 2 or 3 hours worth of music that he had personally chosen for them to listen to. So, yeah, I like it. We're talking about religion. Some people's religion is football. Cameron, you're not a massive football fan, but William is. And he's taken George again. These are nice pictures, aren't they? This is father and son bonding at the football.
It is, yeah. Disappointing, though, because they've not made it through. Aston Villa, William's team, has not made it through to the semi-final. Of course, they lost against Paris Saint-Germain last week in Paris, which William and George both attended. This week, they did win, didn't they? But they not enough to get through to Champions League. But you can tell my football knowledge is exquisite here. But it was a lovely father-son moment. And I think it's nice that William allows the public and the press to see the family dynamic within the royal box. And they had some friends with them. So the Duke and Duchess of Westminster, the Duchess of Westminster, of course, pregnant at the moment, were also accompanying them inside the box. William was an usher at their wedding. Was it last year, 2 years ago?
And Harry didn't attend. And Harry and William have always traditionally been friends with the Duke and Duchess of Westminster. Or am I stirring a little bit there?
Maybe. And Hugh Grosvenor, I think, is George's godfather, isn't he? So, yeah, there's a bit of a family moment there.
But it was interesting watching William last night at Villa Park because he talked about why he chose Aston Villa as a team originally, and it was as a boy, and he thought, I'm not going to follow the crowd, and all his mates were supporting Manchester United or Chelsea, and he thought, I'm not going to follow the crowd, I'm going to go for a mid-table team and a bit more of an emotional roller coaster. And my goodness, did they get that last night, because Aston Villa were 2-0 down, they came back, it was 3-2 to Villa at the end, but on aggregate, they lost, and they are out of the Champions League.
In many ways, these are things that he's not going to be able to do when he eventually becomes king.
Well, I don't know. Will he? I mean, it really is an absolute passion for him, isn't it? And we know last week when he was in Paris and he was giving some of his pre-match punditry, he does actually live and breathe this. And so, does he give it up? It would be pretty tough, wouldn't it?
It would be tough. And I think what we've seen from William over the last 5-10 years is he does things his way. So I think he will still go to football matches when he is king. But of course, he will have to balance it a lot more with his red boxes of government papers and all the rest of it. So perhaps not as often, but I think he will, when he can, still, go out and about and watch the football. Because the king, I think, perhaps has downtime behind the scenes, but perhaps William will be happy to be seen in a football box as monarch.
They're very different passions, don't they? We talked about the king and his classical music, and we know he likes painting things, whereas William, football is absolutely at its heart. I think it's also really important that he gets to share that with his children. He said that, Charlotte and Louis were watching it at home. He'd taken George along. George there in his, villa scarf as well. I think it's really good for them to be in that environment.
Well, I think there are many parents or many fathers or mothers, because take children to football, will be watching this footage, watching those pictures and saying, well, that's just like me and my little boy,
albeit they're in, a VIP box and they're perhaps not exposed to some of the language that you might hear in the stands at some of the matches. Exactly. But, it's something that he really gets to share with George, and as they get a bit older, I'm sure Charlotte and Louis as well.
Because he has said that George is free to select whoever he wants to support.
Kind of.
I know.
Kind of. You're free to, but I'm only going to take you to Villa matches.
This is Villa's first Champions League run in 43 years, so it might not happen again for another 43 years, George. So you could always, you don't have to support Villa.
Although he looks very passionate in the photographs.
Yeah,
when Villa was scoring, even he was screaming his head off. So he was really enjoying it and into the match.
Good. Right, just time for the quickfire questions, please. So take a deep breath. Princess of Wales' scout videos. So which royal would you most like to go on a hike with?
No longer alive, but I think the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip, would have been fascinating to go on a hike with in the hills around Balmoral, because, he wouldn't hold back, would he? There'd be plenty of chat from him, not always the most discreet. I always found him fascinating, and he can put on a mean barbecue as well.
I imagine he'd walk really fast.
Really fast.
I don't know, I just imagine he'd walk really fast with purpose.
And be a bit impatient if you couldn't keep up.
Yes, I'm a fast walker, so I think I keep up with Prince Philip. I also would like to hike in the Balmoral countryside. It's beautiful up there. But I would like to do it with the king, because if you remember, there was that video which a cyclist had captured on the GoPro, just happening to stumble upon the king on a hike in the hills around Balmoral. And the chat he had there, very down to earth, talking about the bit of landscaping he was doing on his land. I think that would also be a fascinating conversation.
The king was on his own as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I think others had been driven. He decided to, walk it.
So there is a chance if you go to Balmoral this summer, you might bump into him and you could join him on a hike.
Yeah. Quite possibly. Yeah. I'll try and see if I can get that through.
So on Meghan's podcast, which other royal should have a regular podcast, and what would you want it to cover?
Oh, I would love for William to do a football podcast, and just his knowledge with Rio Ferdinand at Paris Saint-Germain last week was incredible. I didn't quite realise how into football he was, so I think that would be a very interesting podcast.
Well, I would have said the same, and he was quite good actually when he went on Mike Tyndall's rugby podcast, The Good, the Bad and the Rugby. So if I can't have William, maybe Princess Anne, because on that podcast they revealed that they had to edit quite a lot of it out, some of the content, which didn't quite make it to the broadcastable version. And some of Princess Anne's put-downs of her son-in-law and his co-host were absolutely genius. So I think she'd be fantastic value on a podcast.
Two great answers, thank you. Right. So this is about the King and Queen's new music for the wedding anniversary. Which royal would you want in control of the music on a long car journey?
Prince Harry, maybe. Bit of hip, quite, might be a few surprises in there.
It would mean you'd have to sit in the car with Prince Harry on a long car journey, though, Sarah.
Yeah, but, Bit of hip hop, bit of Elton.
Yes, yeah, he'd like Elton.
Who else would he have in there?
Spice Girls.
Spice Girls, definitely.
From his younger days.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think Prince Harry would be quite entertaining.
I'm going to go
playlist together.
Yeah, I'm going to go rogue here, and Princess Margaret's grandson, San Chato. Oh. And the reason being is because A, he's a similar age, so presumably he's got similar taste in music. Yeah. But also, he's just launched an arts exhibition in Japan because he's an artist. He does a lot of sculpturing, if that's a word. And therefore, perhaps he'd have good artistic taste. So I think he'd have quite an interesting music playlist going on.
Two great answers to finish on. Thank you so much. We've been through a lot, so I really appreciate everything.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Right, that's all we have time for on this week's Royal Exclusive. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments as we do read them. And don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. See you next week.